Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to this week's NACDA's virtual programming series lineup. I'm Bob Vecchione, NACDA CEO, and I hope you and your staffs are continuing to stay safe along with your families during this pandemic. As we mentioned last week, NACDA is proud to offer this as a segment of our convention Senior Administrators Mentoring Institute. Those of you who were with us last week, we talked about things that you could do from a interviewing perspective to get ready to hopefully sit in the chair. And today we have three experts with us who are going to talk to you about that very important first 100 days. It's kind of in every athletics director's repertoire when you take over a position that you really concentrate on what you're going to be doing for those first 100 days. Today's panelists are poised to provide you with their experience at three different institutions. Our panelists today are Whit Babcock, Director of Athletics at Virginia Tech, Brent Jones, Director of Athletics at Troy University, and Kim Pate, Vice President for Athletics at Lenoir-Rhyne University. Each of our panelists will introduce themselves to provide you a little bit of background before we dive into the discussion. And thanks again for being with us. Before we begin, I want to remind you that at the end of the session, we're going to have some time, probably 15 minutes or so, for some questions. So please use the Q&A Zoom feature at the bottom of the screen, and you'll be able to just submit your questions there to the group. Further, I'd like to thank the sponsor of today's session, Dynamic Pricing Partners, for their involvement with NACDA. Partnering with over 75 sports and entertainment properties, Dynamic Pricing Partners are experts in pricing, predicting pace of sale, and distributing inventory across multiple channels. Their experience, technology, and data ensures their partners exceed their goals and maintain brand integrity across all of their platforms. To learn more about Dynamic Pricing Partners, please visit their website at dynamicpricingpartners.com. Panelists, thank you again for being with us today. And Brent, I'll let you start. Thank you again.
All righty. Thank you, Bob. Again, for everybody, my name is Brent Jones. I'm the Director of Athletics here at Troy University. Very excited. I am a participant as well as I will act as the moderator for this. I'll give a brief overview of my career. I was a college baseball player playing Division I, II, and III in descending order as part of that, and then started my ascent in college athletics as I worked 2 years at the University of Mississippi, Ole Miss, received my master's there, and then spent 5 great years at Georgia Southern, all working in sponsorships, marketing, communications, external operations. Then had the fortunate chance to be named the Associate AD at Southern Miss, where I spent 6 years there. And then 3.5 years ago, came to Troy University, first for 2.5 years as the Deputy AD of External Operations, and then just celebrated my 1-year anniversary last Friday as the Director of Athletics as that part. So very excited to be on here. Again, I'll be the moderator as well as a participant. And with that, Kim, would like to introduce you and hear your background.
Thanks, Brandon. Congratulations on your anniversary. That's a big deal.
Thank you.
You always remember those dates, right, of our anniversaries. And so I'm thrilled to be here with everybody and just, share my journey, through college athletic administration. I'm finishing up. I just finished up my 12th year as an athletic director. I have had the privilege to serve at 3 different Division II institutions. I actually started out coaching softball. I was a student athlete, played softball, but I had the privilege to step into the AD's role really young, like I was 32, I think that's young. And it was my alma mater. So I started there. I was in the AD seat for about 4 years. And then I ventured out Midwest, found myself called to Illinois. So I ended up at the University of Illinois, Springfield, served 5 years as the athletic director there. And then 4 years ago, I took the step here back to the Southeast here at Lenoir-Rhyne University. So excited to be a part of this conversation. It's Whit, you are the next one up.
Yeah, thanks. My name is Whit Babcock. I work at Virginia Tech. The first NACDA conference I went to was in 1996. At that time, I was working at James Madison. I came up through the external side of things and also worked at Auburn and West Virginia and Missouri and Cincinnati and now Virginia Tech. And I've been an AD at Cincinnati and Virginia Tech for nearly a decade. I do not believe the AD job is the be all end all. If you have the drive to do it and feel led to do it, great, but there's nothing wrong with the number 2, 3, 4 hitters as well. So hopefully this first 100 days can help no matter what your role is and help you think more strategically. But honored to be a part of it, and thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Let's jump in. So between the three of us, I see that we have 23 years experience, and I'm glad that I'm really making this number move up with my 1 year experience. So I'll be taking some great notes with that as well. But Kim, let's start with you. Okay. Multi-stop AD, before the 100 days, talk a little bit about your transition to Lenoir-Rhyne, the timeline, and then what went into that. How fast were you able to get boots on the ground?
Yeah, it was different than obviously the previous 2 stops. I was hired in March and they wanted me to start June 1st. And I thought, that's a long time, no problem. I can manage this. So I went to, my chancellor at Illinois Springfield and said, hey, have this great opportunity. And she was relieved that she would have me for more time. So I thought, well, no problem. Everybody's happy. And all of a sudden I found myself doing 2 jobs for series of 60 days or so. And I eventually navigated, to cut that down to an earlier start, early May. But that's a long stretch. And I'm sure others have been through that. I didn't realize what I was signing up for, because you want to leave things in good shape. And you want to tie up any loose ends, but it's really hard to live in 2 worlds. And so that was a challenge for me. And through that, I actually had to hire three head coaches during that interim time, so I was working around the clock. That in essence could have been my first 100, days, but for purposes of our conversation today, I'm going to focus on when I actually got here.
Got you. Great. Thank you. Whit, talk about your transition. Let's go from Cincinnati to obviously Virginia Tech.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact timeline. I want to say it was around a month. So, it becomes public, and then in a week or so, you have a press conference, and then maybe a 2-week, 3-week transition period. And I just feel like, you leave it very well where you are, but then once you make that commitment, you need to get there pretty quickly. What I enjoyed too, well, let me back up a bit. At first you get text and it's great. It's kind of a celebration. And then it's, okay, let me refocus on what's really important. That stuff can wait. I've got to nail this press conference. I want to do that right. I want to take care of my family. You also have this honeymoon period. And I would say this, you only get one of those. So enjoy it. But what I found that worked very well in between that announcement period, the press conference, and getting on campuses, I called all of our head coaches. I asked for a top 50 list of donors, our executive staff, deans on campus, things and touch points that you can make. And word spreads pretty quickly that, hey, even before they got here, they did that, right? It's the right thing to do, but it also gives you a few early victories. And then as far as the transition, family-wise or with significant others, there's a lot of ways to do it. The way that seemed to have worked best for me is to go ahead of my family. You're pretty much, 12 to 16-hour days every day and working all the time. And then you have to have a good support system and significant other and try to make that transition. But yeah, you're bouncing back and forth. It's a whirlwind, but you only get one chance to make a first impression, and you got to be sharp and be on point.
Absolutely. And I'll add, just from my experiences going from the number 2 to the big chair per se, is I had to quickly fill out my roster and my staff before even the 100 days plan was in place, which was a little bit unique because I needed to figure out who was going to replace me. And then that was an internal hire, a person by the name of Kyle George, who had been with me for almost 10 years at that point. And then because of that move, then I had to hire another position to backfill him as well before that even started. So staff is always on your mind. All right, Kim, talk a little bit about your 100 days. What was the plan that you put in place that you wanted originally, really starting from the day that you were on campus? What did you want to get accomplished those first 100 days?
Yeah, I think, I think I focused in 3 areas. The first was just, assessing. I wanted to understand, the intricacies of the athletic department, the climate, the culture on campus. I wanted to know everything I possibly could about the athletic department, the university, so that I would be able to develop, a comprehensive strategic plan to move it forward. And so it's, the analogy I would use, it's like a puzzle. When you look at, if you're coming from the outside, you've got the outside corners and the sides all framed up, and you think you understand it, but there's a lot on the inside that until you get into the job and into the role and into the community, you really don't understand it. So I was really focused on listening to understand the culture, learning, asking questions, and engaging key stakeholders. And so you mentioned putting your, putting your roster together. That would be the second part of my plan, was just building my team. While I'm listening and engaging, I'm also, in essence, building my team and trying to make sure that I'm fostering relationships with, my staff and really just sort of connecting with people across campus that are going to be really important partners for me. And so, and then of course it goes external to the alumni and corporate and folks in the community. But, I think building my team is the second piece. And then third was just addressing immediate needs. Inevitably there's going to be some things that come up that you don't expect. I've been at 3 different stops, and everywhere I've been, there's something they didn't tell you about on the interview, or you just, you didn't pay attention to. So, having to address some of those immediate needs. I had to navigate an NCAA infraction case that was, moving towards summary disposition.
Oh, wow.
I certainly knew about that when I interviewed, but it was something I had to take on. Like, I couldn't just focus on building relationships and putting my team together. I had to handle that, just to can't ignore those kinds of things. And then also just looking for early wins, opportunity for us in the short term to be able to gain some momentum and to gain some traction. And so listening to our coaches on what would make the biggest difference in the next 90 days. And so we renovated our lobby and, added a strength coach, and we fixed a few things that, would really give the coaches a sense of confidence that we're moving forward.
Those are great. Whit, talk about your first 100 days, either at Cincinnati or at Virginia Tech, and what you hope to accomplish.
Sure, and Kim covered a lot of it. Really, you're evaluating, you're watching and listening. One thing to learn is it's a lonely job. You really need to keep it to yourself. Whatever you say will get repeated, right? It's like the new guy or girl at school, and it's the latest news, and you go from maybe being a number 2, 3, or 4, and so that part becomes pretty lonely. And just know that everything gets repeated. But I would say one structure or process that we went through at Cincinnati and Virginia Tech, which was invaluable. Had that first meeting with the entire staff, said I'll be back in a couple weeks, and they had a homework assignment that they would turn in, and I met with every staff member in the department in their office or cubicle, wherever they are. I went to them, and they had to complete this 1-page assignment. On the front, it was a SWOT analysis, right? Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats as they saw it for the athletic department. On the back, it had something called start, continue, stop. What would you like to see the athletic department start doing, continue doing, or stop doing? And then I had a couple questions about who are the people in the department with the most positive energy, because I wanted to find out who they were. And then I asked a question about who are the, when you have something really important going on, who do you go to for advice? Because I wanted to find out who the formal and informal leaders were. Now, that process was great. It was exhausting.
Yes.
But to show people that you care and go out there and do it, it really gives you a broad department. It shows that you care about the employees, that you're in it with them. And that was the best, but it was exhausting. And after you get through half of them, you have a pretty good feel for it, but you can't lose steam. And if you don't get to somebody for 6 months, how does that make them feel? So it has to be tight and done in the first couple of months, but that was the best exercise that I felt like I could share with y'all.
I would echo that. Being the internal candidate, and obviously there was a full national search. So there were 6 different candidates. I was one of them, and then there was pared down to 2 people. I wanted to make sure that people really saw me as the AD and not the deputy AD anymore in that role. And so I really had to be very strategic. And some of the things and it really, as going through the process, going through the actual interview process, you really define your first 100 days per se as you're learning more about it. Obviously, I knew this institution, Troy University, extremely well, but it was about keeping the momentum, keeping the trajectory, and then the continuity. But I did something very similar that Whit did, and it was absolutely 100% exhausting. You have 3 different resource groups here between myself as well as Kim and Whit. But I met with every single one of our staff members. I was able to do that as part of it. And then I met with every one of our head coaches within the first 2 weeks. And so my door was closed a lot. It was phenomenal. I was able to ask them questions that I really hadn't before because I oversaw external operations. Now the buck stops with me literally everywhere. So I was able to ask a lot of those kind of conversations. But one thing that came up with this is my door was always closed. And so I realized that after about the 3rd week, everyone said, is Brent ever going to come out of his office? And so even though I met with every single department head, every single member, as well as every single head coach, and it was exhausting. I gained a lot of information, but my door was closed the entire time. And so just sort of going through that, you want to be open to your people as much. One thing, all right, we talked about this. How do you define, and I'm going to go throw this to you, Kim. How are you able to define the key stakeholders that you really wanted to engage with your first 100 days?
Yeah, some of them, are obvious for us, right? We know all the key people that we interface with in athletics, and, obviously head coaches met with all of them, all the internal staff. But I think every campus is different. Having, served on 3 different campuses, the roles and the politics and the dynamics, the people dynamics and the roles they play in athletics is different. And so, I'll share that when I was at Springfield, that the list of people that I identified was very different than when I got here. It was a little shorter list here. And of course, that's a public institution, a lot more layers and perhaps, the org chart's a lot bigger. So it had me going a little deeper and wider. Also, when I stepped in, I think there was a need to build some trust between athletics and the broader campus. So I asked my vice president for student life, who I reported to, who he thought I should meet with. And on my first day, he gave me a list. I swear it was 2 pages long. And, I already have my list, but I thought, okay, there's some similarities here. But, he gave me his list, and the same thing happened when I got to Lenoir-Rhyne. I asked the president who I needed to meet with. He gave me a short list. And then I asked the vice president, just down the hallway as well, who was in development, from an external standpoint. And so that's kind of where I started. And I think as you're meeting with people, you just listen and you hear names and you realize that person may be able to help be a part of your team and is going to be a key person. That's how I approached it.
That's great. Obviously, Whit, you talked about that you asked your coaches to give you some names. How did you also identify some other key stakeholders that you needed to engage with early on?
Yeah, it's an important part of the job, as you well know. And again, Kim nailed it. To add to that, knowing who to ask and who are the key people that have the juice, right? If there's somebody that you miss and you don't get to them till 2 months later, sometimes that can come back to bite you. So the people of influence and affluence, I believe, would be critical there. I would also try to remind people that the search committee themselves, right? It may, quote, just be a professor, this, that, or the other, but those people have their name on you, so to speak, and they're going to be people, since they hired you, that want you to be successful. So I still believe on leaning on them, keeping in touch with them is a good idea too. But Kim nailed it. There's not much more I can add to that. What would you add to it, Brent?
Well, the one thing is, so I oversaw external, but I was not heavily involved in development. And that's one thing that I needed to get my arms around very quickly. And that was probably a lot easier than I thought it would be, because while I was never making ask or anything else, I was always around them as part of it. But the biggest thing for me even being an internal candidate. So all of our fans knew me either through social media or events or games or matches, whatever that may be. It was finding out who the key stakeholders were on campus and how that I align myself with them and how do I make myself valuable for them. And that's one thing that that took some time. Here's the great thing, and we never have talked about this, and this is sort of going off script here, but the previous AD, Jeremy McLean, brought me over here as his deputy AD. We worked together for 6 years. And so he's one of my best friends. He's one of my mentors. I literally value his opinion on everything. And so I was able to, going through the process, I was able to pick his brain as part of that. And so let me throw that back to you, Kim, first is, did you reach out to anybody, the previous AD or anybody in the conference to gain some knowledge about that? And then I'll throw that to you too as well, Whit.
Yeah, that's a great question, Brent. You know, I actually got a call from the vice president for development about just put my name in the hat. It was actually the president who had hired me at my first job, and he was here. And so I was able to pick his brain about, just, the whole university and, just to get a good feel and pulse for things. And then I also reached out to an athletic director that followed me at my last institution because we were in the same conference at the time. And so I asked him his thoughts, on, how he perceived, this opportunity and funding and resources and culture and such. So that's absolutely part of our research. And I think that's critical when you're looking at a job.
Got you. Whit, either from Cincinnati or from Virginia Tech, did you reach out to the predecessor there at all?
Yeah, I believe etiquette wise, it's absolutely the right thing to do. Again, it's another early call you need to make if the previous AD, is still in town or has connections. And he says, I haven't even heard from Brent. It's been 3 months. So etiquette wise, and then etiquette wise, never criticize anything they did, right? Neutral to positive. I even asked on the SWOT form, what was something that Jim Weaver, what were some things that he did great so I can make sure that I continue doing those.
Wow.
It's just about paying respect that way. As far as gathering other information, as both of you know, and many on this call, you will get no shortage of feedback from people. It's just sorting through it, listening, nodding, not showing your cards. And before long, themes will start to emerge. But there are people that can give you the real insight, the commissioners, other people, and that's part of your skill set, right? You have to find out where the influence is and all that. But the etiquette with previous AD, I believe, is very important.
That's great. Let's talk about this. So we talked about the 100 days plan, what you hope to glean. We'll go into that a little bit more, but talk about balancing the internal constituency with the external. And, there is a fine line there between your wanting, and we're going to talk a little bit later about staff and coaches and how we evaluated them, but talk about setting up. Was there a split 50-50, Kim, or how did you want to go about ensuring that you were hitting the touch points and the people you wanted internally, but also externally?
Yeah. And honestly, it's a tough balance. I would say that I think that, my first priority was certainly my coaches and the staff, voice of the student athlete advisory committee. Like I really felt like I needed to, in many ways, re-recruit them. One of my AD colleagues talks about you need to re-recruit your coaches every day, and that's stuck with me. So my first sort of priority is internal with coaches, and then it sort of branches out to campus and still kind of internal and under the campus umbrella. But I would say it was probably more 70-30 split. I listened for the key alumni and external people, and I made sure I got to those people. But certainly, I had to prioritize on my team, so to speak.
Right. All right, Whit, talk about that internal, external constituency and how you sort of balance that or what you wanted from it.
That's a great question, Brent. I hadn't really thought of it consciously of what's the split, what's to do it. Again, art and science on that. And this was not very scientific, of course, but I just used 3 different notebooks. One was, this is what I need to focus on right now, this week. The next one is, hey, this is coming up in a month. And then the other things were, I just don't want to forget about these things, right? And Kim talked about early victories. Don't come in and want to change the logo or change the school colors. And, let's not be ridiculous about it, right? There's going to be some harder hills to climb that you'll see. And then that priority of, all right, do I need to attack that now or later? But internal, external, great question. I don't have the answer to it. It was more just of a feel and prioritization that it has to go both ways. And I really liked your story about the shut door, right? And it's internal, it's external, but it is an art rather than a science. And you have to be good at both. If you get out of whack one way or the other, it's going to hurt you.
Well, absolutely. And let me tell you what I did is obviously I talked about that I met with all of our coaches and staff within those first 2 weeks, which Whit, as you effectively said, it was exhausting. It was daunting. And then I spent from about 6 o'clock until about 9 or 10 every night trying to speak to our donors, call them that were out of town. Obviously, Troy, for people who don't know, Troy is the third smallest town in FBS. So a lot of our donors and alums live, whether that be 45 minutes away, an hour, Dothan, Montgomery, Atlanta, Birmingham. So they weren't able to come to the press conference. And I was really needing able to be as part of that and see them, but still trying to get as many donors as possible. One of the things that I did the first 2 weeks is when I met with our staff, especially when I met with our coaches, it was a listening time that I met with the staff. But for the coaches, I wanted to let them know what I stood for as the athletic director, because when you're a deputy AD, you take on, we've all been there. We've been the number 2, the number 3. You take whatever your boss says and you run with it. And so Jeremy McLean was a phenomenal AD, great friend of mine. We helped hire 2 coaches, our football coach, as well as our men's basketball, which I'll get into and how that sort of helps you. But, I needed to shed the deputy AD role and come into it. And so I wanted them to know what we were going to stand for: integrity, honor, and some of those pieces, to really, like what you talked about, Kim, almost try to re-recruit the head coaches to see me in a different light as part of that. All right. Here's the big thing before we go into any more else. Kim, were you able to accomplish everything that you wanted to in your first 100 days plan? And if not, what didn't you accomplish?
Yeah. I mean, in full transparency, absolutely not. As hard as I tried, there were always things. It's like drinking water out of a fire hose, right? It's intense. And so, I would say that third stop, it was amazing how much better I got at that first 100 days. And I think for me, I think I understood the end goal a lot better this go around. Not to not answer your question, but I think that the end goal for me was, as you said, like setting the culture and the expectations and really people understanding what I'm about, and that's part of that engaging, with coaches and people across campus and alumni, is to listen, but also to reaffirm some stuff. But I think I didn't get to certain people on my list that maybe were, 3 or 4 months out. But we got there. So, but more importantly, I think I understood what was really important in the first 100 days is to, understand that the picture and the culture and the climate and those themes starting to emerge of things that we needed to embark on from a strategic planning standpoint, and then to sort of cement the culture piece.
That's great. Whit, were you able to get everything you wanted accomplished at Virginia Tech in your first 100 days? If not, what did you hope to get that you weren't really able to get to, but you maybe tackled a little bit later?
Yeah, for the most part, yes, I feel like we did. But as athletic directors or executives, we all know you never quite get everything perfect. So sure, there were some things still left hanging, I'm sure. And I know we use the term 100 days, right? Some places it's 90, some it's 120. Don't come in, my advice would be, don't come in with too much of a set 100-day plan. A very good idea, but every place is different. Something else that I learned when I first became an AD, you're in charge. You want to show people you know what you're doing. You want to justify your existence in hiring. So I found that almost every meeting that was coming to me, I was making decisions like that. And really, again, you only get one honeymoon. Even if it's only 100 days, doesn't mean you don't make any decisions at all, but it's okay to say, I don't know, or I'm evaluating that, and we're still looking at that. So it's a really valuable 100 days. I wouldn't come in, again, with a predetermined strategic plan, things such as that. You need to learn the place and let the game come to you. Exhilarating, nerve-wracking, but also the most exciting part are those approximately first 100 days.
That's a great point. We all worked our career to get to this chair. And the first thing that you want to do is many times you want to put your stamp on things, but if you could hold off and gain as much information as possible and really receive buy-in on that. And as part of it being that servant leader, that's a great approach. All right. So this question I cannot answer at all. This is going to go for the multi-stop ADs. What would you do differently that you did your first time? Obviously, in your case, Whit, for your first time to your second time, and then Kim going through your process of 3 now. What was the different from the first time to this last time?
Yeah, for me, it was really my focus. I think early on, my first stop or even in my second, AD stop, I was really too focused on the what and the how, in listening. I was listening for the wrong thing, how we did things and what we did things and what was missing. And I had evolved probably more from a managerial mindset to a leadership mindset, and realizing that that's really what's important. So it was more about the why and those core values and the culture, and really focusing on the people side of things. And so I think for me, just sort of recognizing that first 100 days is really about positioning your program, getting everybody, rowing the boat together and on the same page, and gearing up to be able to chart a course instead of just how we operate and how we can get better.
Gotcha. Whit, from Cincinnati, your first 100 days to Virginia Tech, what did you do differently?
Yeah, I've been here 6.5 years and I'm getting older, so I don't know that I remember at all, but I do know this: the second time is easier than the first time. I mean, whether it's a first time head coach, second time head coach, you learn and grow from it. I guess a couple points though to point out what I would do differently now with Zoom. You talk about your calls at night, one-on-one. We could do a private group with 20 and you could accomplish a lot more. The technology I would do differently. And then I believe as you do it more often that you get a little better understanding of staffing, meaning when I first got to Cincinnati, I thought, well, I can just do it with all these people and we'll be okay. And everybody had a clean slate and did. But in reality, there are going to be some people that fit with your culture and some that don't. And what I found is people can fool you for a while, but after about 100 days, you tend to figure it out. So you don't need to come in necessarily heavy-handed, but I was a little more quick to realize that here are the areas that I want to be a little bit better at Virginia Tech, and felt the need to bring in some other people. So it's not heartless, but at the same time, you're getting paid to be a leader, and that's some of the decisions you have to make.
Well, that's great. That's going to transition. We're going to talk about culture and staff and coaches a little bit later, but just stick on these two things. How during that 100 days period, because it is tough to trick somebody for 100 days. Eventually, your work ethic, your personality, your character, integrity will show through. How did you, Kim, determine over that period of time, any kind of metrics or anything else, the strengths of the department and then the weaknesses?
Yeah, no, that's great. I think certainly I was looking for, like, listening and asking questions. Everybody I met with, starting with my interview, I asked every single group, what they wanted to see, like what was their vision for the future. And so I started gleaning that through that process. And then when I got on campus, really was an informal sort of SWOT analysis just by, asking questions. I also took my leadership team through a SWOT analysis just in a formal retreat within the first 100 days. And so, from there, I think it started to emerge with some themes. And then, looking forward a little bit, I knew from my perspective what I felt like, the directions we needed to go. And I actually brought in a consultant to help, to get an external sort of perspective. I hired Tim Selgo, former NACDA president. For me, I think great mentor, certainly. And I wanted to, he's seen everything in Division II, from high level to small privates like us. So it was great for me to get his perspective. So I brought him and we, I gave him my assessment and he gave me his, and it was just awesome to get somebody else's perspective. There's a lot of certainly things that we saw together, but I think for me that was important. And I was, this was here at Lenoir-Rhyne, starting my 8th or 9th year as an AD, and I think sometimes we have to be humble enough to ask for other people's perspectives and realize that we don't see everything. And that was a great growing experience for me, and I think we got a lot done because of that.
That's great. Whit, how did you determine the strength of your department and some of the weaknesses were?
Yeah, primarily through those one-on-one meetings with staff and specifically asking them. And that was a excellent exercise. And everybody gets a chance and a voice, and it doesn't take you long to figure it out.
Okay. All right. So we're going to go into culture, which is the buzzword these days. We want to change the culture. We want to keep for me, it was, we want to keep the culture. We want to keep the momentum going, but y'all coming in from the outside, Kim, as well as Whit, obviously you knew about both institutions during the interview process, which in my opinion is so critical. Really your first 100 days almost starts in that interview process and then goes up really during that interview when you get it. But how did you evaluate the culture of the department, Kim, during your first 100 days?
Yeah, a lot of the same process, I think, is just listening to coaches, my leadership team. I asked them point blank, what do you love about the culture? What do you not want to change? What's really special about this place? And noted that. And we actually defined it in a culture document about what we aspire to be about. And so we had about 7 themes or so. So that's kind of where it started and evolved. And I had 2 head coaches on my leadership team. So I was able to get the coach's perspective as well.
Great. All right. Whit, you talked a little bit about culture before, but how did you evaluate and understand the culture, either at Cincinnati or Virginia Tech?
Yeah, I keep going back to this. I guess art more than science, self-awareness and situational awareness. I learned in a way, not to say change the culture, we're going to evolve it, polish it, whatever you want to say, because the school that you're at, it was there long before you got there and will be there long after you're gone. And that word change, improve the culture, refine the culture, etc. So it may just be some wordsmithing, but I thought that was really helpful. Also, I did not come in and say, this is our culture. I did try and tell people what I stood for and what I believed in, but we actually had the exercise brand identity. We have an executive staff and a senior staff, which is bigger, but our senior staff was involved in it. And really, it was good to be from the bottom up, not the top down. And then what we focus on now, or have some at Virginia Tech, is changing from a challenger brand to a champion brand, right? It's easy to chase uphill, but it's harder to get up there and stay up there. And we thrive on, we do more with less, but we need to get comfortable in that other role as a champion as well. But the culture will reflect the leader. If you have chinks in your character and other things, it'll come out. But that culture is an elusive word and probably the most important one that we all manage it. And you can make it great and then screw it up pretty quickly as well. So good luck with it.
Well, I will tell you this, before we talk about how you evaluated the staff and coaches, it just dawned on me, we all 3 leaned on somebody or people during this process. And I had the good fortune of being able to be here for 2.5 years and really was able to know the institution, and then also the connection that I made. And then obviously with the previous AD, being able to pick his brain at any time, and then really having a good senior staff with our deputy AD, as well as our executive associate that I worked hand in hand with. Kim, you coming from the outside in, who did you really lean on inside the department during this time period?
Yeah, honestly, I think that it ended up being probably the, less the person you wouldn't expect. I had a senior associate athletic director who had the title. He was actually a head athletic trainer, and he was super passionate about, the university and had been here a long time. He bled red and black, right? But he was so honest with me. Like, he was the guy in the room that would tell me the truth. And so, straight shooter, and we forged trust right away. But I felt like, he's the guy that's going to tell me, what I don't want to hear. So that's the person that I immediately, forged, a bond with and certainly trust.
Got you. Whit, how about you? Who'd you lean on during that process?
Certainly faith, right? That's a good one. And then out of the other side of my mouth, early on, I didn't trust, well, trust isn't the right word. I didn't trust anybody to share wholeheartedly. I felt like that had to be earned. I did try to come in with coaches and other people and say, hey, you may not have chosen me, but I chose you, and we're together on this now. Those are just a couple thoughts, but another great question. What about you, Brent?
All right. So the one thing that I was able to is obviously the previous AD, lean on him. And Jeremy is the total opposite of me. And so he's very stoic as part of it. And so I really learned a lot of things. And so I think if you're coming into this situation, and I know everyone wants to be lifelong learners, you really have to figure out about yourself as you're going through it, especially the first time in the chair. And I know both of y'all have talked about it gets easier as you go on. But the one thing with that I had to really make sure that I was doing correctly is your voice matters. You can't gossip anymore. You don't, that's the thing. You're just being present for some things carries a lot of influence. And I had to make sure that was being the case, because I moved across the hall. And two things is, one, I wanted them to be able to see me as the AD. I was the one, I'm the one that's making the decisions, but also I wanted to make sure that they were part of the decision-making process. But I had to make sure that I wasn't hanging out at the coffee pot and getting into the gossip about this or trends or this or that as part of it, because that's not what I should be about and what I should do as part of that. And so to be able to have that knowledge and that base was really helpful to be able to sort of glean that. Also, from my time period at Southern Miss, Bill McGillis was our director of athletics. He went on and left and went to San Diego. Jeremy McLean obviously got the job at Troy University, and then Daniel Faig, who is at USC Upstate. And so we had 4 ADs, or including myself, so 3 that I could really be able to call on and lean on during that period of time. All right, Whit, I'm going to stay with you real quick. You talked about relationships with coaches and staff, and obviously you have a big one with Frank Beamer, who obviously was a legendary coach. You did not hire him. You inherited him, as well as some other coaches. Talk about how that relationship went with you not hiring coaches, but getting them on board and then working well with them.
Yeah, great. Another great question. Some of what I said when I met with those coaches, trying to put them at ease that, hey, I'm great if every head coach we have is good enough to be here. And my first job is to support you and help you win, not try to replace you. So I chose y'all. You didn't choose me. We're in it together. And you have to be careful not to, create an old coaches versus new coaches standpoint. But yeah, they're understandably nervous. How do you put them at ease, say, do your job, and get them in line with that? So that's part of it. What else could I add to that, or did I miss a part of that, Brent? I'm sorry.
No, it was just about how you develop that relationship, that working relationship.
Yeah,
the coaches you did not hire.
One-on-one visits with them. Like you said, your presence matters. I try to go by practice. And just being there and being seen. Now, what I learned from that is just stay a little while, long enough to be seen, know you're there. If you show up and you stay too long, they start to get a little nervous, So
that's what I was going to say. That is a fine line between showing up and not.
That's right. And then if you have coaches that you've inherited that have done a good job and you give them a contract extension, they're yours from then on. So it is just leading and giving them all an honest, fair chance to prove themselves. But yeah, put them at ease and spend time face to face with them. Some are high maintenance and they need you around a lot. Others just want to be checked on. And again, that goes back to that self-awareness, situational awareness, and it's part of the fun of the job.
No, I think that's correct. And Kim, talk about that as well. How did you get the coaches to be on your side, or not necessarily side, but work with them who you didn't hire?
Yeah, I like Whit, I think right out of the gate, that I embraced them just like I'd expect a coach to give every kid on their roster that they, take over at least a chance, and so, really investing time with them and allowing them to, to share everything. They want to talk about their coaching philosophy. I'd get into that, and really talking about what they feel like where their program is and what it needs, and having some, just good dialogue and honest dialogue. Some of them, right out of the gate were asking me for full-time assistant coaches, or, I'm sure you probably have some similar stories, and even being honest and saying, look, no doubt looking at the rest of the league, you probably need one, but we're not there yet. And I think having some honest dialogue right up front, allows some, trust to at least form.
Absolutely. The one thing that I took away from this is working with the coaches. So I was part of the hiring process with our head football coach, as well as our men's basketball. So Troy University last year, from January 1 to June 12th, was the only school in America, Division I, that we know of that had a new football coach, new men's basketball coach, and a new AD during that period of time. And so you forge a lot of relationships with it. But going back to the two of y'all's, which I didn't want it to be an old new. Everyone had a clean slate. I worked heavily with our women's basketball coach. I was the sport administrator for baseball, but that didn't mean that I was choosing baseball over softball. And I was very apparent with that I needed to make sure that I spent enough time with some of their other coaches. But a few things that I've gleaned from y'all is, one is, I told this to all of our student athletes as well as our head coaches. My job as an AD, I worked 20 years to get to this chair. I thought I knew what an AD was, and I realized what it is. It's about being your biggest cheerleader. At the end of the day, I thought it's about making decisions, but if you're not in it for the student athletes, if you're not in it for the coaches, it's about being your biggest cheerleader. And really taking some things from y'all. You're not going to be successful very long if you don't have a high PI, political intelligence, if you don't have a high EI, emotional intelligence, and if you cannot read the room effectively as part of it. I don't think that you'll last very long as part of that. And so that's what I would say. The last question that I have before we turn it over to this is evaluating the staff. How did you evaluate the staff and realize the ones that you wanted to keep, promote, or maybe weren't best suited for your culture, Kim? How did you evaluate that?
Yeah, I think sitting down with them and figuring out, just allowing them the opportunity to tell me where their program was, what their goals and aspirations were, what their needs were, and to be able to, outline what their plan was to get there and where they've been and where they've come from. Checking to make sure we're a good fit philosophically, that they're about the student athlete experience, and just really listening and asking questions. Unfortunately, I think depending on the timing, sometimes you have to go through at least a cycle to really figure out. You may have, like I had some suspicions early on of some coaches where I had some concerns, and then I saw it play out, in the first season. So I think for me, it's probably about a 1-year process to really fully evaluate. And we don't have the same contract type setup that maybe is at Division I and Division II. But, early on, I knew who the rock stars were, and I knew who those that were maybe a little concerning, and just diving into that and setting goals, letting them set goals, and then holding them accountable for it.
Got you. Whit, how did you evaluate your staff?
I guess with coaches and our executive staff, right? I tried not to pre-evaluate it. I just like when a coach comes in and takes over a team, what is he or she going to say? Everybody's got a clean slate. I hope you'll be successful. Everything starts over and let's go. But evaluating them, we talk about this. I'm still learning a lot about it, but 2 classes they really don't ever teach you is how to interview people and how to evaluate people. And I feel like we're getting better at it. I think it needs to be more than once a year. I've gotten better at being more direct, not heartless, but I believe people ultimately want the truth and respect you for that. And just like me with my boss, just shoot me straight so I know where I stand. But that evaluation part and how you do it, that could be a whole session, that and interviewing. But ultimately the cream rises to the top, and you don't want them to be surprised, right? I tell them that if I'm not happy with what you're doing, it won't come as a surprise. And sometimes you have to say to coaches and staff, if we don't meet these goals this next year, we may be having a much harder conversation.
I agree with that from my standpoint. Before I turn it over to Katie for any questions, is really one thing that I wanted to make sure is that I was effectively communicating to the staff my needs, wants, expectations, as well as to the coaches. And so that's gone through with the pandemic that we're in, as well as from the COVID-19, as well as the social injustice, is really trying to make sure that we're having open lines of communication. And that's not the most comfortable things. If you hadn't sat in this chair before, that's not the most comfortable thing when you have, especially Kim, you talked about you were 32 years old. I was 38 years old, and you're speaking with someone who might be your senior of 20 or 30 years or been in the business longer, or might be a Hall of Fame coach or something like that, to be able to say, hey, this is where we need to go. This is why, as part of it. But I'll wrap that up now. And Katie, I'll turn it over to you for any questions that our viewers might have.
Great. Thanks, Brent. Well, thank you all for sharing your experiences. And before we jump into questions that we've received, just a reminder for folks that are participating with us today, if you have any questions for our panelists, please feel free to submit those using the Q&A feature on your Zoom toolbar. So the first question, a couple of folks asked a very similar question. Obviously, the first 100 days are going to look very different for ADs starting during COVID-19. What recommendations and advice might you have for new ADs who have to develop relationships virtually, along with having to manage an unprecedented event?
I'll tell you, I think Whit hit it. You better get comfortable with technology. So we've been back at the office since June 1st, fully, at least Troy University has. And yet I'm not holding any in-person meetings right now. It's all Zoom. So really effectively, I wish Zoom, which obviously was around, but I wish I had known about it. Instead of making that one-on-one calls, I could have had a really, really true conversation with donors and staff and fans alike. That's what I would say from my perspective.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to that one. Yeah, it's never before seen, right? You have to adjust the sails and get in there. But I guess one thing the coronavirus has taught us too is that we wasted a lot of time on things that weren't really, really, really important. But as far as AD in these times, getting hired in these times, you're on your own. I got nothing for you on that.
Yeah, I would just add, what a great leadership opportunity to really, I think in crisis, it creates an opportunity for us to, really serve the people that are under us, our coaches, our student athletes. And I just think, I can't imagine being in that situation, but I would say to find some perspective, just step in and, serve and love on your people. And, I guess, put your team together and you're going to have to trust, I guess, to some extent that you've got some people who are capable, and support them, through the process of navigating that on your particular campus. But whew, that gave me like heartburn.
I would tell you one thing that I've learned, being an external person and dealing with development and marketing and sales communications, you better understand the budget inside and out, dealing with the pandemic that we're in. And so I've always been told, my old AD at Georgia Southern, Sam Baker, says, you better, if you want to be an AD, you need to touch money. And what he meant by that is either you need to be the business person or you need to be a fundraiser, marketer, ticket seller type of deal, because at the end of the day, that's how you're going to be able to sort of move your department forward. And I think that's even more paramount with what we're dealing with. I think all three of us would say that we're looking at some type of budget issues, whether it's reduction or reallocation or something like that, that you really have to get your understanding of quick. That was probably a different experience for me compared to the two of y'all. I had to get updated very quickly on that.
Great. Well, you all mentioned through your comments about how much time you spent building relationships in those first 100 days. But obviously, you know, there are some demands outside the office too, with transitioning both yourself and possibly a family into a new environment. Talk a little bit about the work-life balance during that rapid first 100 days.
Yeah, I'll go. You know, at the time that I took this job, I had a 5-year-old. And so, you know, really, I think, you know, it's a partnership. And I think I'm fortunate to have great support, you know, with my husband and all, but we went at it as a partnership and we mapped out a plan together as far as me going for a week and coming back and all that. I think just, you know, I think that it takes that. And I think obviously it takes that on a day-to-day being, you know, an athletic director, but just for me knowing that my daughter was in great hands, my husband had her taken care of, and you know, we would sync up and swing back around and make sure we're good, you know, as a family. But that's hard, but it takes a partnership.
Yeah, great question. I don't really believe there's a work-life balance. It's more like work-life harmony, right? Because 50-50 is tough. But how do you incorporate this job with the lifestyle if you have children, and can have them to games or other things? But it is hard on a family. We had 3 kids, all boys age 4 and under. And then our oldest, when we got to Virginia Tech, had lived in 5 states. I mean, in some cases, it may not be worth it, right? It takes an incredible toll and strain. But that transition period, at least on that part, for me, it's worked better because I'm going to be all in over there to separate for a little while, come back together. And then obviously whoever's coming along with you, you come in, everybody knows you, you have work to keep you busy, instant friends, so to speak, and that trailing significant other, family, pet, whatever, it's a lot harder on them. So yeah, that's something that's not talked about enough.
Again, from my perspective, being an internal, I was everybody's best friend. My wife was everybody's best friend. We knew them before, but we took on a whole nother role where we were out front and, you know, how was I interacting? Was I going places, things like that? And so really making sure that my family knew, because we didn't have to move. We didn't have to change schools, but sitting down with my wife and our 2 kids, we have a 6-year-old and a 5-year-old. My son turns 7 tomorrow. They were born in Hattiesburg. This is only the 2nd place they've ever lived. This is, for the most part, this is what they remember. But just to say, hey, you know, we used to have great seats here, but I'll never forget sitting them down saying, you're not going to be able to run during football games and throw the ball. You're going to be in a suite. And they said, what's a suite? You know, and now I can't get them out of the suite, right? Like I want to get them out of the suite during basketball and baseball and football games. Now it's the suite life for them, you know? And so just really being open and honest with those kind of conversations of what's expected for me, as well as my wife and kids.
Great. Well, we have time for one final question here before we wrap things up. You all spoke about implementing your vision and mission amongst the staff and having them on your side. What are some of the things that you did or tactics you used to get donors on board and get excited about the future of your department?
I'll start first. I had that relationship, but I told them where we were going. I asked all of our coaches as well as staff to do a needs wants report. So this is a critical need that we have to be successful. And want is something like we want a new stadium per se. And so I put it in those kind of categories. I got all that information, gleaned all that information from our staff as well as our head coaches. And then I was able to take that information directly from our head coaches, who at most places already have great relationships with your donors. And so that instantly said, hey, he's already asking me questions about this. And I was able to take this directly. Because of that, we received a $25,000 gift to finish out our weight room for dumbbells. I never would have known that we needed dumbbells unless I asked our coach, going back to what Kim and Whit said, as well as put it on a needs wants report, and was able to really say, this is what we want. This is how we can move this program forward for our donors with your help.
Yeah, real quick, you know, I think I started by engaging like my booster club, board, and that's about 36 people. I called every one of them within the first 2 weeks of getting the job from Springfield, Illinois, and listened to them. Tell me your perspective. And so it started there. And then, I think probably around day 100 or so, it collaborated to have like a large dinner and, to kick off our year. And at that point, I was able to message out, just, what the direction was and sort of start to shape the vision. And then it grew from there. Every year I give an update, and, there are opportunities for me to get in front of audiences externally, and I make sure that I capitalize on that moment to be able to, to sort of provide clarity on the direction.
Yeah, as far as engaging donors, I came up through development, so I'm not always sure I can explain it, but I do know this: whenever I've raised money, you have to genuinely believe in what you're selling and that it will make a difference. And if you do, you're really not asking them for money, you're asking them to come along with you, right? And leadership is not about being divisive, it's about bringing people along with you. And if you get in there and you see something that's really going to impact your student athletes or your wins and losses, and you really believe it, it's not that hard to sell it. And then but donors can also be on campus, right? If we get campus to give us $1 million more a year, or 500,000 or 20,000, whatever your scale is, that's like a $5 million gift over 5 years. So there's a lot of fundraising that goes on. And anyways, it's a big part of the job. And thanks for letting me finish up the show. I see the Godfather Bob back on, so it must be time.
Well, thanks everyone, Whit and Brent and Kim, a very good session. This will be copied to our YouTube station. So if any of you want to, watch it again, Whit, you could send it out to all your donors to get autographs and all that kind of stuff. But seriously, really good session, very important information. One of the things that really stuck with me, that I had a flashback when you said it, Kim. You had to go, when you change chairs, you got to go from managerial to leadership. And that really resonated with me, because it's just one of those things that just, the light bulb went off from dust to take all the dust off it. But really, I appreciate your time, appreciate your, your mentorship to all the young people out there. Keep up the good work, and please, everyone, stay safe and continue the NACDA Daily Review. We'll have future webinars going on, so please join us for some more sessions down the road. Thanks again, everybody. Be safe.